Last week, I put out a poll to you guys asking who you felt would have the most pressure on them going into the season. And I had asked this because there were a few takes from my hot takes video a couple weeks ago that said DeMar DeRozan would actually be under the most pressure this season because of his poor performance in the playoffs during his years with the Raptors, which I don't agree with at all, and I explain why in that video, so I don't want to go into it too much in detail here. But a lot of you in the comments on that poll mentioned that Billy Donovan would actually be the guy under the most pressure this season. And when I put out the poll, I meant to say that this would be which player would be under the most pressure, but when I saw all the comments around Billy Donovan, it got me thinking of the whole Bulls organization. Billy Donovan will likely be under the most pressure this season, and how this year is actually going to be a pivotal one for him. And with the Bulls' first preseason game coming up tomorrow, I figure what better than to discuss the crucial season for Billy Donovan and his future in the NBA, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. So a bit of background and context behind Billy Donovan for those who may not be aware, but of course Billy Donovan really rose to fame as a standout coach during his days coaching the Florida Gators, which he led the school back-to-back titles in 2006 and 2007. Joakim Noah and Al Horford were on those teams. Billy Donovan had a very illustrious career as a college coach, not only winning 2 NCAA titles, but also 4 Final Four appearances and a 3-time SEC Coach of the Year. Now in 2015, which was the same year the Bulls decided to hire Fred Hoiberg, another college coach at the time, Billy Donovan likewise made the move to the NBA and accepting an offer to coach the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, I've said this before months ago, but whenever a very successful college coach makes the leap to the NBA, I'm always a bit skeptical because more often than not, over the course of history, great college coaches don't make the best NBA coaches. You're talking about not only a completely different style of play in basketball and a pedigree of basketball, but also you're dealing with completely different egos at an NBA level. Players that are making millions of dollars to play the game, who have a lot of power and sway in the league, as opposed to much younger, unpaid athletes who are much more amenable to buying into coach's system. The relationship between a player and a coach at the college level is seen much differently than it is at the NBA level. And we've seen that even in past coaches with the Bulls. I mean, Fred Hoiberg, who was a great college coach before coming to the NBA and obviously failed coaching at the professional level. Tim Floyd, another college coach who was an awful coach in the NBA, especially with his time in the Bulls. And you had a lot of other non-Bulls coaches, Hall of Famers like Rick Pitino, try out the NBA and couldn't even come close to the level of success that he had in college. But a bit of a tangent, all that being said, I thought the same would happen with Billy Donovan, especially because Billy Donovan was coming into a situation on a Thunder team that had title aspirations with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. And despite the Thunder kind of getting off to a rocky start with the newly hired coach, they actually bounced back and had an incredible season, one in which they narrowly beat the 73-9 Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. But of course, they blew a 3-1 lead against them when it was thought that the Thunder were all but on their way to the finals and potentially a championship. Of course, the Warriors would go on to blow a 3-1 lead themselves to the Cavs in the finals. And then Kevin Durant thought he would sell out and go join the team that he couldn't close out a series against, and the Thunder would now no longer be as relevant with the departure of Kevin Durant. Long story short, Billy Donovan surprisingly went on to have a decent run with the Thunder. Granted, he did get some help after the Thunder made a trade for Paul George, which of course he was then later traded to the Clippers. Then Westbrook was moved as well, and I think what was actually the most impressive about Billy Donovan's tenure with the Thunder was his final season with the team, in which most people felt that after trading away Paul George and Westbrook, that the team would be all but a tanking team and one of the worst teams in the league. But no, on the back of Chris Paul, the team exceeded expectations and finished with the 6th seed in the West and narrowly beat the Rockets in the first round, taking them to 7 games. Of course, the Thunder and Billy Donovan agreed to part ways because Billy Donovan didn't want to be a part of a long rebuilding process in OKC, which the Bulls' new front office decided to jump on a now available coach in Billy Donovan. Now, I hadn't started the channel yet when the Bulls first hired Billy Donovan last season, but I have to admit, I was pretty hesitant about this signing when it was first announced. I mean, first of all, it kind of came out of nowhere. You had guys like Ime Udoka, Wes Unseld Jr., and Kenny Atkinson as the main candidates who were the most talked about to fill the head coaching job for the Bulls. And there was never any mention of Billy Donovan being a serious candidate for this role. But in any event, without rambling on too much here, Billy Donovan became the Bulls head coach, and despite being leaps and bounds better than Jim Boylen, obviously had a disappointing season with the Bulls, missing the playoffs when there were expectations that they would make it, especially after the trades were made at the deadline. And then there was a lot of criticism of Billy Donovan from Bulls fans throughout the year, including myself. You know, I talked a lot about his questionable rotations throughout the season, how his utilization of Vucevic in the pick and roll and spacing the floor wasn't always used properly to its fullest, and how he didn't adjust the pace of play after the deadline to fit the new additions to the roster. But overall, there were a lot of things I did like seeing from Donovan. I also think that it was just refreshing to actually have a competent coach for the first time since 2015. Now, I know you had some people, really just a few fans in here anyway, calling for Billy Donovan to be fired after the season concluded, citing that it was inexcusable for the Bulls, as talented as they were, to even miss the play-in. But yeah, that wasn't going to happen. Not in an evaluation year, and not in a year where you had health and safety protocols which kept players in and out of the lineup. In particular, Lavine at the end of the season, which really prevented the Bulls from making a postseason appearance. But look, here's the thing with Billy Donovan for this upcoming season. This will be a make or break year for him, for his long-term future with the Bulls and the NBA. As much as the expectations are low for the Bulls from the national media standpoint, as Bulls fans, we expect a lot from this team and for the Bulls to make the playoffs at a minimum. We need to see progress in all areas where the Bulls lacked last season, which I talked about in a prior video, in limiting their turnovers, improved defense, better run offense with improved playmaking, getting to the foul line more frequently, and of course, better energy, hustle, and a desire to want to win and leaving it all on the court every game. And I've talked about my expectations of the Bulls in past videos, but I expect that the Bulls be a top 5 seed in the East. In my view, anything less than a 6 seed with the level of talent they have is a disappointment. And a lot of that rides on Billy Donovan in bringing this roster together, fitting well together, and playing as a team rather than letting egos take over and players focusing on their own individual performances, which, let's be honest, we saw a lot of that last season. And that's on coaching to manage those egos and having the guys play team basketball and ensuring the guys are working hard and playing with effort for the full 48 minutes. Now, I mentioned in videos earlier this season that there would be no way that Arturis would fire Billy Donovan after one season coaching the Bulls, no matter how bad the Bulls played. However, I did say that if the Bulls disappoint and miss the playoffs yet again next season, that Billy Donovan likely would not be returning for the following year, despite still being under contract. And that's even more true now after the Bulls made all these moves this offseason. So here is what this upcoming season means for Billy Donovan, because you guys are right. The guy who has the most pressure, more than anyone going into the season, is Billy Donovan, as this is truly a make or break year for him as it relates to his future coaching in the NBA. If the Bulls miss the playoffs, especially if they fail to even make the play-in game, he's gone. I mean, as highly as AK speaks of Billy Donovan, and obviously when he made the hire, you know, he spoke very highly of him then, he will be forced to suck up his pride and admit that he made a mistake in hiring this guy as the head coach. If the Bulls make the playoffs, but they have to do it by way of a play-in, and they end up getting the 7th or 8th seed and they get destroyed in the first round in 4 games, presumably against the Nets or the Bucks, Billy Donovan would likely get the axe. Because in my view anyway, that's still a disappointing season for the Bulls, with all the moves that they made in going in on all of these players that they pursued. Barely making the playoffs and then getting swept while they're there isn't good enough to say that the season was remotely of a success, even if it means making the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. If the Bulls can at least be a top 6 seed in the East, which again, I think should be the expectation for this Bulls team, and anything less than that would be a disappointment barring any major injuries or unforeseen circumstances. But then, if the Bulls were to get to the playoffs and then they completely bomb, again, that likely would spell the end for Billy Donovan and his time in Chicago. So look, in order for Billy Donovan to maintain his job as the head coach of the Bulls for the following season is only if the Bulls make the playoffs as a 6 seed at a minimum and they actually play well in the playoffs in a hard-fought series, even if it means losing in the first round. And actually, the more I think about it, even if the Bulls barely squeak into the playoffs, which Billy Donovan would be riding on thin ice if that was the case, but then they play incredibly well and lose in a hard-fought battle, taking the number 1 seed or number 2 seed to 6 or 7 games, or hell, even upsetting a top seed, then Billy Donovan is going to get to keep his job. Anything above that in terms of the Bulls making the playoffs with a decent seed and playing well in the first round, even if it means losing in the first round, Donovan will be able to keep his job. I mean, that's not that hard. With the talent the Bulls have, you would have to think that that should be fairly easy to do for them. All they have to do is make the playoffs and have a decent first round series. Anything better than that, obviously Billy Donovan is going to be back the following year. Now, the reason I say if the Bulls disappoint and Billy Donovan were to be fired by season's end, that it would likely spell the end of his coaching career in the NBA. Well, it's because Billy Donovan has been fortunate enough that every season he's coached in the league, with the exception of last year, he's had a superstar on his roster. Whether it was Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, or Chris Paul. And even with those superstars, aside from that very first season in which they went to the conference finals but then blew a 3-1 lead, his team lost in the first round every single year. And with the exception of his last season with the Thunder, in which it was expected that they were going to do very poorly and ended up making the playoffs and actually played very well in that first round series, they did have a very disappointing outcome for a Thunder team that was expected to make a deep run in the playoffs with Westbrook and Paul George. So Billy Donovan to come to the Bulls, obviously coach a lesser team in his first season with less talent, but then for his second season having 3 all-star caliber level players, and to miss the playoffs or get bounced in the first round in embarrassing fashion, it would likely signal to the league that Billy Donovan isn't fit to be an NBA coach, and you would likely see him returning back to coaching college basketball. Again, I'm not saying that this will be the case. I actually think that Billy Donovan will do fine and that the Bulls will have a successful season in meeting the expectations we have of them as Bulls fans. More so, I'm simply stating that if the Bulls do perform poorly, it likely will spell the end for Billy Donovan and his time coaching, not just for the Bulls, but in the NBA in general. And you guys are right, the pressure will be on Donovan more so than anyone to get this team to perform well after the front office has essentially decided to go all in wanting to win now. I want to know what you guys think though. Do you think Billy Donovan will be facing the most pressure going into this season? And do you think if the Bulls underperform, that not only would he just be fired from the Bulls, but likely this would mean the end of his time coaching professional basketball? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.